see here. I don't know if you've seen the film The Life of Pi. How many people here have seen that film? Put your hand up if you have. Okay, a few, a smattering. Okay, the story is tells the adventures of a young boy called Piscine Molitor Patel, or Pi. He's an Indian boy, and his family is emigrating to Canada from India, and they're emigrating on a boat full of animals. His father runs a zoo. And then the boat is shipwrecked on its journey across the Pacific. And the ship sinks and his family dies. Now, Pi miraculously escaped. And at the end of the film, there's an insurance company interviewing him about why they think the ship sunk. And they're trying to work it out. And Pi begins by recounting this amazing adventure that he's had, a solitary life on this lifeboat, along with a hyena, an orangutan, a zebra, and a 300-pound Bengal tiger, which he names Richard Parker. And it's an amazing story of adventure. The film is set on the seas, and it tells that story, and it's a beautiful, beautiful, eye-popping, visually impressive movie. Pi recounts this story to these insurance clerks, but they don't believe what he's saying. They don't believe a word of what he's saying. And so then they say, come on, tell us another story which we can kind of write up. And he says the following, this is it from the book. I know what you want. You want a story that won't surprise you, that will confirm what you already know, that won't make you see higher or further or differently. You want a flat story, an immobile story. You want a dry, yeastless factuality. And then Pi proceeds to tell another story about how the boat sank and how various people survived on the boat. And he tells this story, and then the insurance clerks think, oh, we could probably believe that one a bit more. That's more realistic. Instead of these crazy animals, there's real people on the boat. And at the end of the telling of this second story, Pi says the following: you can't tell which story is true and which is not. You must take my word for it. I guess so. In both stories, the ship sinks, my entire family dies, and I suffer. Yes, that's true. So tell me, since it makes no factual difference to you and you can't prove the question either way, which story do you prefer? Which is the better story? The story with the animals or without the animals? That's an interesting question. One person says the story with the animals. So the story with the animals is the better story. And Pi replies, thank you. And so it is with God. And the book is an amazing book, and the film is an amazing film, and it's basically saying that really, however you might understand life, you can conject a story that most makes sense for you, and whatever makes sense for you, that's the true story, and so it is with God. And one way that you might understand that kind of understanding of reality is called pluralism. Pluralism says you can't make one absolute truth claim exalting your view over every other view. You can't say it's the best. Really, all religions are similar to those two stories about what happened to the boat. They're basically true in their own right. They're basically the same. Maybe they have different labels on them. And the story goes that they're more or less like mountains up, or one mountain with many paths going up a mountain. And the top of the mountain, it's God. And the worldviews, like the stories in the life of Pi, are simple truths that apply relevantly to the people who believe them, and they're each true in their own right. And the standard illustration that's given is that of 6 blind men and the elephant. I don't know if you've heard that one. So you've got 6 blind men stumbling around an elephant. They're all trying to work out what they're around. And one person grabs an ear and is convinced he's in front of a flag. And then someone else kind of lands up against the side of the elephant and thinks, no, it's a wall that's in front of me. Someone else grabs a tusk and thinks it's a branch. And for all their groping, they're all coming at the same truth from different angles. Well, so too, the analogy goes, all religions of the world are like the various stumblings around the same beast, namely God. And of course, the cardinal sin, the thing you can't possibly do, is claim that you as a fellow seeker are more onto the truth than someone else as a fellow seeker. Who am I to say that the trunk I'm holding on to is any more true than the branch that you, my other religion friend, is holding on to? The very idea that there can be absolute truth, kind of overarching all of reality, for many people today, it's perceived as plain immoral to claim that kind of thing. It's a religious trump card that you can use to win any game with someone, because you have the truth. Well, I just want to kind of probe that idea, this idea of pluralism for a little while, because I think very quickly, if you probe it, it becomes quite unattractive for a few reasons. I think for three reasons. Firstly, I would argue that pluralism is inconsistent. It never strikes to amaze me how, with such ease, a pluralist can authoritatively proclaim you absolutely cannot and must not make absolute truth claims. It's plain immoral to enforce your view on everyone else, and we downright insist that everyone else takes this view. Do you see the kind of hole in the argument, the inconsistency there? I think not only is pluralism inconsistent, I think it's pluralism that often plays the manipulating power play. For pluralism not only decries those religions that make absolute claims, but it very often positively attempts to silence them. So I have friends who work in other parts of the country, and various student unions in Birmingham, Exeter, Edinburgh in recent years have tried to push the student group from the campus. And I think that's far more manipulative or kind of Spanish Inquisition than any religious group I would want to associate with. So firstly, I think pluralism on its own terms is inconsistent. It pulls the rug under its own argument. Well, secondly, I think I would argue that pluralism is patronising. Now let me try and explain what I mean by that. It's very true that a great benefit of 21st century pluralism is the promotion of tolerance, and we all want to promote tolerance between different people. If one person can believe in Allah, someone else can believe in Krishna, and they don't come to blows, that has got to be a good thing. And in a sense, David Cameron's idea of multiculturalism is a right an idea. But we need to be very careful that when we try to affirm all religious beliefs and say all of them are equally right and true, when we go so far as doing that, we actually affirm none of them. By insisting that all religions are the same, basically, with equal validity, just different labels, we actually ignore and suppress what's distinct about those worldviews and religions. And we sacrifice intellectual integrity on the altar of kind of cultural tolerance. And you're left with this kind of patronising idea that pluralism wants to say, well, in the same, let me quote Pi again. This is Pi early on in the book, The Life of Pi. He says, Hindus, in their capacity for love, are hairless Christians, just as Muslims, in the way they see God in everything, are bearded Hindus, and Christians, in their devotion to God, are hat-wearing Muslims. But is it really a case of different facial hair that kind of separates the world faiths apart? I'm not so sure. So let's take a few examples. Take belief in God, for example. In the East, Hinduism believes that there are many gods, millions and millions of gods. Sikhism, founded by Guru Nanak, believes there's just one God. And Buddhism, according to the Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, says that there are no gods. Into the debate wades pluralism and says, see, you're all saying the same thing. Well, you're all equally true. Well, I'm sorry, the law of non-contradiction, there can't be millions of gods and just one God and no gods. We can't all be true. That just is not right. That's patronising to say they're all the same or they're all equally right. Some are right, some are necessarily wrong. Take the person of Jesus Christ. Islam says that Jesus was not the Son of God. He did not die on a cross, and therefore he did not rise again. Christianity, on the other hand, claims that Jesus was the Son of God, that he did die on the cross, and that he did rise again. And pluralism says, see, what's the problem? It's saying the same thing. To which I want to say, well, you're not honouring those faiths to say that. It doesn't work. Christianity doesn't intend it to work. Islam doesn't intend it to work. They are different. They're making different absolute truth claims. They both actually believe what they say, and they both can't be right. That is just plain fact. Now, sure, that doesn't mean, it mustn't mean that opposite absolute truth claims should come to blows. We don't want that at all. But it's plain patronising to say that basically they're the same, albeit with different hair and hats, equally valid. I'd argue pluralism is inconsistent, it's patronising, and thirdly, I would also want to argue it's naively arrogant. Now let me be clear, I say naively because I don't think pluralist friends of mine intend to be arrogant, and I'm sure we all need to examine our own motives behind the comments and the views that we hold. But let me say, when a pluralist kind of reduces the issue of world faith and the different views that people have to the blind men and the elephant, that analogy we used at the start, what I want to know is who's telling the story? Who's telling the story of the blind men and the elephant? Presumably it's the pluralist who's looking on at the various stumblings of the blind men and women around this elephant called God. And they're able to say that you religious people, you people with different faiths, you're all blind, whereas me as a pluralist, I've got 20/20 vision, I'm completely clear. But what right does the pluralist have to privilege themselves outside of the picture? How on earth can they do that? Who's to say they're not another blind person stumbling around in the dark? So when pluralism places itself in the position of the kind of religious commentator looking down, actually I think it's incredibly arrogant, because it's not admitting that it's doing that, but it positions itself very subtly in the kind of royal box, commentating on the rest of us human beings. No, pluralism should be exposed to exactly the same scrutiny that every other faith should hold on to. At this stage, I'm not claiming one is better than another. I'm just simply saying that the view that flattens them all and says that they're more or less the same, equally valid, equally irrelevant, well, I think that's inconsistent. I think that's arrogant, naively so, and I think it's patronising. Surely a much better thing to do would be to line up all the religious options in front of us and fairly and squarely go through them and then choose the one that you're convinced is the truth. Now this talk is called How Can Jesus, or Why is Jesus the Only Way to God? It's a Christian claim that Jesus Christ stands head and shoulders over all other religious leaders and authorities. So I really want to spend the rest of our time examining that claim and offering three key pieces of evidence that anyone who would want to reject Christianity would need to deal with, and convincingly deal with. Three pieces of evidence that come from the lips of Jesus Christ and are recorded by one of his best friends, John, in the little slips of paper we've got on the floors underneath our seats. Do you want to try and hunt those out? You'll find them like this. They're kind of A6 sized. Oops. Okay, so it says at the top, John chapter 14, John was a friend of Jesus and he wrote up a biography of Jesus Christ. And I'm going to read out the first 6 verses. Do not let your hearts be troubled. This is Jesus speaking here. Trust in God, trust also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you may also be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? Jesus answered, I am the way, and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now, just to set the scene, Jesus is effectively on death row. This is the night before he goes to the cross and dies. And his friends he's with are beginning to realise, wait a second, he's going to go and leave us and we're going to be on our own. And we may well face the same fate too. And he's saying, don't you worry, I'm leaving you, but I'll be back. To which Thomas, of so-called Doubting Thomas fame, helpfully asks the question, Lord, we don't know where you're going. This is little number 4. We don't know where you're going, or verse 5. How can we know the way? And then Jesus gives this wonderful reply. I am, this is verse 6, the way, and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. 3 massive claims we're just going to kind of unlock, really, from that one verse. Okay, here's our first big claim. Only Jesus is the way to God, because only Jesus died for us. Only Jesus is the way to God because only he died for us. If you were to strip back all religions to their bare essentials, I don't want to patronise, but I think, having studied quite a lot of the different faiths, there is a common thread, and the common thread is that humanity's lifelong quest for the divine, whether that is to be with God, be that Allah or Yahweh, or to reach a state of perfection and nirvana, having gone through the cycle of reincarnation and so forth, it's all achievable because of what you do. Do. Be that the 5 pillars of Islam or the 8-fold path of Buddhism, keeping the 634 or so rules of Judaism, or even the more popular views today, going through certain motions of prayer, or being a nice person, or giving to charity, or keeping Lent. And the thinking is, as long as we do these things, then God, whoever or whatever he is, will keep his part of the bargain and let us into heaven. He'll give us ecstatic union with the divine, or however we want to understand that. It's like the idea of religious karma in all the faiths. If you do X or Y or Z, then that is enough. Well, friends, I'm afraid to say, if that is your thinking, then according to Jesus Christ, that's badly out. Only he is the way to God, he says, because only he died for us. And it gets spelled out in these few verses beforehand. He says, don't let your hearts be troubled, that his friends are afraid and are nervous, and they're afraid that they're going to be left on their own. And he says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, trust also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. But I'm going there to prepare a place for you. Jesus is saying that he's the only way to heaven, and the way he makes the path clear for us to go to heaven is if he has gone ahead to make or to prepare a place. And in order to prepare a place, he needs to die. That's the way to heaven for Jesus. Because heaven is the place that only perfect people can go to. No matter how good you've been, how religious you have been, no matter how sincere you've believed what you've believed, no one of us deserves a place in heaven. Not the Christian, certainly. Not the Jew, the Muslim, the Sikh, the Hindu, not the atheist. None of us naturally deserves a place in heaven. For none of us are perfect enough, good enough. The good deeds that we do will never outweigh the bad deeds that we have done. If God is perfect, we need to be perfect to know him. On Sunday is the 20th anniversary of the death of Bobby Moore, who I'm a West Ham fan, and Bobby Moore's a bit of a hero in those parts. Bobby Moore was the World Cup winning captain when England won the World Cup in 1966. As Bobby Moore was walking up the Wembley steps to receive the Jules Rimet trophy, and it was going to be given to him by the Queen, who was standing there in all her pristine garments as the Queen of England, to give the trophy to Bobby Moore. He suddenly realised, and you can see this on a video, as he's walking up the steps, he realises he's covered in dirt. He's been playing football, his hands are full of dirt, and he's kind of rubbing his hands. You can see it on the picture, on the video. And then he goes up, shakes the Queen's hands to take the trophy. When you meet the Queen, you've got to get rid of the dirt. You don't have a place to receive a prize from the Queen if you're dirty. Well, if that's the case with a footballer and the Queen, how much more with us and God? He truly is perfect. Yet not only our hands, but our hearts, our whole lives are covered in dirt. And yet, Jesus Christ says, I'm the way to God because he died for us. Imagine this is my hand here. It's covered in dirt. It doesn't know right to know God. And God is up in heaven. And the dirt, maybe that's kind of marked up by this little book here. It's separating me from God in heaven. Yet here's Jesus. He's got no dirt on him. He has always lived perfectly. When Jesus died on the cross, it's as if he took my dirt onto himself. He was separated from God. He died my death, which means now I can be completely free to have a relationship with God. Only he is the way to God, because only he died for us. Secondly, though, only Jesus gives the truth about God, because only Jesus is divine. Now, we touched on this on Monday. Only Jesus gives the truth about God because only he is divine. If you don't know yet whether or not God exists, maybe you're a bit agnostic, and you don't know yet, but you'd like to know now, well, you can know, because in Jesus Christ, the truth about God has been kind of disclosed for all of humanity to see. The author of the play of life has walked in through the front door of the big brother house of life and showed us what he's like. That's what that amazing verse is. Can you see little number 7 on our sheets? This is Jesus speaking. If you really knew me, you would know my Father as well. From now on, having seen me, you do know him and have seen him. Wow, isn't that incredible? Then verse 9, he says, Right now, penultimate line, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. That is the claim that Jesus is none other than God on earth. The author of the play of life walking onto its stage. He claims to be God, but then amazingly, he substantiates that claim. He has an amazing God-like character. Just generosity, kindness, love, great power. Heals the sick, the blind and the lame. He has a God-like conduct. Even when he's dying on the cross, he's saying, Father, forgive them. He preached, forgive your enemies. And then as he's dying on the cross, he's enacting that himself. He's forgiving his enemies too. It's a huge claim, but if he proves that that's true, then I think we need to believe him. Only Jesus is the truth about God, because only Jesus is divine. And again, there's lots more to think about. Come back afterwards and grill me on that. But that is the claim, and I think it's proved by what Jesus said and did. Thirdly, though, and very briefly, only Jesus gives life with God, because only Jesus rose again. So can you see in our little verse? I am the way, the truth, and the life. And only he gives real life with God, because only he, among all religious leaders, rose again. He stands head and shoulders over all the faiths, because uniquely Jesus Christ did not stay dead. You visit Medina in Saudi Arabia, you'll see the tomb of Muhammad. You go to Chufu in Shandong province of China, you'll see the tomb of Confucius. But 3 days after being brutally killed, Jesus rose again, publicly appearing before hundreds of people. And many of those people would have been alive when John wrote his gospel, which means it would have been very, very easy for, if everyone knew, oh, he didn't die, he didn't rise again, easily just pull out the body and show that he's all been a fake after all. And it had never happened. And generation after generation of people who had once been cowards and afraid were being convinced, transformed into witnesses to Jesus' resurrection from the dead. Only Jesus rose again, which means only he can give life with God. And that's the encouragement in our little number 3 in our verse. Do you want to have a look down again? This is what he says. I'm going to heaven to prepare a place for you. Verse 3, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you may also be where I am. So what Jesus is saying is he's about to die. He's going to go through the door of death. He's going to take our sin, our failure, God's anger at that, on himself and die. But he's not going to stay dead. He's going to come through the door of death, come out the other side, and then eventually come back and take us to be with him, offering us eternal life. Why is Jesus the only way to God? That's been our big question we've been thinking through. I would argue he's the only way to God because he's the only world leader who dies for his people. How can we know the truth about God? Because in Jesus Christ, God becomes a human that we might know. Only Jesus is divine. And if we get to know that Jesus, we can be sure that he will give us life with God because he rose again. So I just want to encourage you to check him out. That's where you really find the best evidence about Jesus Christ as you look into him. Now, that's enough for me. I've been speaking for a while now. And 2 things to draw to your attention. Firstly, these little brown books around on the seat, these are eyewitness accounts of Jesus Christ.